Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing Habibi Funk number 3 by Ahmed Malek.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
I have a lot to say about this album, but I'm just not gonna do it right now. I first want to get you all acquainted with the favorite bits, and then we're gonna talk about everything, so enjoy my favorite bits from this album. So let me get this one out of the way. This album isn't prog. It might be classified as some sort of jazz rock, but that's basically as far as it goes. And seeing as I reorganized the list quite recently, why did I decide to keep this album on there? Well, there's a few reasons. So the first one is because this album comes to us from Algeria. Now we don't really get to see a lot, if any, representation from the Arab world, and I really wanted to have some of that on the list, and it was actually one of my goals when I made this list to try and at least incorporate some sorts of albums from the farther regions of the earth. And the second reason is because this album could sort of be defined as a proto-fusion album. You see, Malek was one of the first people, especially in his country of origin, to incorporate rock music and unique technological qualities into his jazz playing. You see, the album we are reviewing today, as you might have inferred already, is not actually a standalone album, but a compilation album. You see, Ahmed Malek was actually a composer usually known for his scores in Algerian films, and this one is a compilation of some of his best works and some unreleased pieces. And when I researched about this album, pondering whether I should keep it in, when I read about Malek and how he used rock music and technology and funk and he incorporated them into his classically trained jazz influences, I really got intrigued by it, and I decided that this would be something that I might actually enjoy. And I think it was all pretty much topped off by the remarkable story about how this compilation was actually made, and it's pretty nice and you can read it. It's pretty short. I'm gonna leave a link to it down in the description. And on that same note, finding information about Ahmed Malek and everything that he did and things about this album in particular is really hard, so I don't really have a lot of concrete information that I could research, but I am telling you what I felt about this album and a bit of things that I could find online. Now, this compilation album was released in 2016, but it is mostly believed that most of the pieces on it were composed and performed somewhere around 1978. And seeing as Algeria is a third world country and also back in the 70s, these guys really didn't have the newest technological means to record quality music. But suffice to say, this album was actually pretty much impressive, seeing as it was recorded fairly fine, although being very rough around the edges. But I do believe that the recording quality on here is fine enough to still be enjoyable and not be so bad that it's basically distracting from the music itself. And my personal assumption is that most of this album was recorded in a live setting, meaning that there were a few microphones that were capturing all the instruments existing on the album simultaneously, which can lead to some really unbalanced parts. For example, you have a section in one of the songs where you can clearly finally hear the saxophone by Malek, but then comes a keyboard solo and it just literally sounds like the keyboard player is in the far corner of the same room and almost not being caught on the microphone itself. But looking past all of that, this album was actually pretty fine to listen to. When it comes to jazz composition, it wasn't too tight or too complicated, it was just pretty much fine, and it's what you'd expect from your average jazz film score with a little of the modern spice. Yes, even in jazz terms, I think that this album would be considered as laughably basic, but I just don't think that that's the point of this album, to be overcomplicated in any way. It just plays the right part for the right section of a film. Of course, I've never seen any of these films and I don't know if I want to venture out and see one of them or not, but it's definitely interesting to think about it, and seeing as the music on here and each and every track has a pretty straightforward title that kinda hinders at what is going on in the film itself, I kinda enjoyed just going by that and trying to imagine to myself what I'd see on the screen in this instance, and this was pretty much the enjoyable experience that I had with this album. On another note, I also really enjoyed the Arabian influences and tones on here. Of course, it's not really influences if you're Arabian yourself, but I really enjoyed that. We get to see a lot of bands and artists on here that use sort of like these Arabian scales on it, trying to make everything sound more Middle Eastern, using various instruments, but something about this music was inherently Arab, and I really like that. And personally, as someone who lives in Israel, where there's a lot of Arab influences to be found, I can genuinely enjoy this type of music. And for anyone who's considering to listen to this one but you don't exactly know if you want to do so or not, mainly because this is in Prague, I would tell you all that maybe listening to this entire compilation isn't your thing, but I can definitely recommend you on a few of my personal favorite tracks. These being the City Part 2 specifically. There's a first part as well, but I don't think it's as good as the second one, and then you also have Hala, which is a really nice one, and lastly, and this one is my favorite from the album, it is Conspiracy Autopsy. But yeah, that's mostly what I have to say about this album. I'm really glad that I reviewed this one. I'm really happy about it. We don't really get to see a lot of things from third world countries, and especially not from Africa. The prog scene in Africa is pretty much small and definitely was small to non-existent back in the 70s. So if this is the closest we're gonna get, this is what I'm gonna take. But all in all, I really enjoyed this album. It was pretty nice. I will have to rate it a bit lower because again, this isn't prog and this is exactly what we're doing on here. But again, as I said, it's a nice listen, and if you're not looking to do anything special and actually dwell into the music yourself, you can just plop this one on and enjoy it for what it is. So when it comes down to this cover, there's really not a lot to say about it. It was made, of course, for the reissue of this album in 2016 with the compilation, and it doesn't really feature a lot. It has some text and it has a photo of Malek himself. And while I don't really have a lot to say about anything that appears on here, I will have to mention that the photo itself is pretty stellar. It looks amazing, it looks good. The black and white on it, of course, I don't think that's a filter. I think that's an actual photo taken in black and white film. The contrast, everything just looks amazing. You get the vibe, the right vibe from this photo, which definitely helps this cover a lot. But you can definitely see that no one was trying too hard to make any artistic statement on here, and that's definitely the case with this one. And I think that it's very nice to just commemorate Malek's work with this album that came out, of course, after his passing. So when it comes to the rating, I just want you all to know that if this series wasn't revolving around Prog, I would have given this one a rating of 7, but seeing as it is, and I have to take that into consideration, this album will be receiving a rating of 6 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to Destroy, Erase, Improve by Meshuggah. I of course want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Walnum and Wrist of Kings. You are the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my About page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.